It's one of those things where it's like at the end of every meeting, I typically ask someone like, who else do you think I should speak to? Who else do you think I should meet with? Because interesting people know other interesting people, and you're benefiting from the networks that they've built over the years. And I think that's been one of my greatest hacks of trying to get in. And also just like, I reject the idea that most people in our industry wouldn't be excited by what FlowBio is building, because if they're not excited by it, they probably shouldn't be in the industry.
Welcome to Long Run Labs, a weekly podcast from the team behind For the Long Run, telling the stories of those running the outdoor industry where endurance and entrepreneurship meet. I started using Rocket Money after noticing a couple of my monthly bills quietly creeping up. You know that feeling when you look at a statement and think, when did that get more expensive? Rocket Money flagged the increases right away, and it even resurfaced a couple of subscriptions that I completely forgot I was still paying for. The best part is how little work I had to do. If there's a subscription you don't want anymore, Rocket Money helps you cancel in just a few clicks. And for bills that jump in price, they can actually work to negotiate them down for you. They deal with customer service so you don't have to, which is honestly the dream. Their 10 million members save up to $740 a year when they use all the premium features, and I get it. It's one of the easiest ways to tighten up where your money's going. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/go-run today. That's rocketmoney.com/go-run. This episode is brought to you by Superfiliate, the platform that finally makes partnership marketing simple. I've used just about every affiliate and partner tool out there, and most are just not great. Too complicated, too expensive, and way too confusing. Superfiliate changes all of that. Setup takes minutes, tracking actually works, and payouts are clear and reliable. It's the one platform I recommend because it does just exactly what it's supposed to. If you're a brand looking to grow through partnerships, Superfiliate makes it easy to get partners genuinely excited to share your products. With co-branded landing pages, flexible rewards, and built-in tools that drive action and make reporting simple, it's partnership marketing done right. Skip the headaches and head to superfiliate.com. Mention this podcast and your first month's free. And welcome back. We have Stefan van der Fluit. How did I do there? Joining on the podcast today.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Thanks, Jonathan.
Awesome. Well, it was fun to meet you here in Boulder. We talked hydration, we talked brand building and investing and all sorts of fun stuff, and figured the next evolution of that conversation is obviously on the Long Run Labs podcast. So Stefan, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I've been a big fan of your show, so it's surreal being on it.
Awesome. Well, first question, as you know, is always a tough one. And who is Stefan?
Yeah, who is Stefan? I think I am slowly starting to find the answer to that question. I would say this year I've started to make some proper headway into that. I think the long and short of it is I'm a massive justice tripper whose art is through the form of products. My family always jokes that my brother's the artist of the family, which he physically is the artist of the family. Yes, he creates lovely paintings and drawings and sketches and stuff, but I always joke that, building companies, building products is also an art form. And that's kind of my form of expression to the world. But more and more slowly am I finding out that my true calling is just trying to instill this sense of kind of conscious capitalism and just do good frequency into what I think is a more harder place to stand out and do good and speak your truth. So I'm just trying to bring a bit of bravery into that, helping people feel safe, speaking what's on their mind, whether it's right or wrong. I think it's important that people feel they can share opinions and have, healthy discourse.
What does conscious capital mean to you? Conscious capitalism?
Yeah, it's a great question. The actual definition, I think, is, different to every individual kind of person who prescribes to it. Obviously, there's slight tunes and modulations, but to me, conscious capitalism means that the best form in which to create value and in which to also maximize shareholder value, not the primary function, but also is by kind of building business and doing business from a place of good and long-term thinking. I think it's, we can go to business school, you can get an MBA, you can study business and do a PhD in it, but at the long and short of business is very simple. It's a relationship between two parties, one party with a product or service, the other party purchasing the product or service. That is business 101. And I truly believe that at the end of the day, the party with the money, they can vote with their feet. And I think more consumers are becoming a lot more aware of the fact that, we all have finite resource in this planet and we all need to be sharing it and distributing it appropriately. And I think over time, more and more consumers are becoming conscious of this fact and therefore seeking out brands who align with those values. And at the end of the day, as a function of that, actually live to tell the story. All the other brands who kind of have short-term values and short-term motivating factors, they all go the way of the dinosaur. So to me, that's conscious capitalism. It's just doing good and doing well by being good. People, planet, profit, basically.
How did you land at that?
So this is something that I have been a student of for well over a decade now. I remember finding out about conscious capitalism when I was at university. So one of my university professors, who was kind of more on the behavioral research and humanities side of the business school, she basically in one of her lectures was talking about kind of organizational behavior. And I think the case study we were studying was Primark. So Primark, who not many listeners maybe know of, but Primark here in the United Kingdom is probably one of the largest retailers for clothing items. Very, very budget clothing, very affordable clothing, but horrible track record in human rights. The case study we were studying was one in which child labor was taking place and unsafe working conditions were observed, and that led to a fire within one of their factories where a lot of people died, including children. And the topic of conversation in our seminars was basically debate, and people got to choose their sides, right? This wasn't like a forced debate where you're given the for and someone's given the against. This was a chosen debate of choose which side you belong to around child labor is okay. And to my surprise, people in my, age group, probably 40, 50% of the room went, yeah, child labor is okay. Because they hid behind the fact that the country in which child labor was taking place, it was legally allowed. The workplace employment laws allowed for child labor. And I mean, throughout this podcast, you might learn that I'm also a native French speaker, but I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, just because something is legally allowed doesn't mean that it's right. And that's really when I noticed, like, okay, I mean, in this group of people all my age who, should know better, half of them are still thinking that, just because you can do something means you should do something. And that really surprised me. So I went to my professor after the class and, was like, is this normal? Like, you've taught this class year after year. And yeah, for her, it's just like, yeah, this is the normal position. You see a lot of students take this position because, they hide behind the law. I just thought like, this just isn't right. So one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. I actually chose to do a TEDx talk on the topic. And I worked together with this professor to basically help build out my thesis around conscious capitalism. And that's when I basically learned about like the origin story of conscious capitalism, which actually was born out of the United States of all places. Is he doing all right?
Yeah, he is. For those who are
found something
listening,
to chew.
He's found something to chew. We've got a dog here in the background, but sorry to interrupt there.
No, you're good. So yeah, basically at this TEDx talk, I delved really into this topic. And one of the things that I found out was Henry Ford was one of the OG conscious capitalists. And basically the thing that Henry Ford introduced was essentially minimum wage in the United States. So prior to Henry Ford, there was no legal minimum wage. Employers could kind of do whatever they thought was right. There was no federal law around minimum wage. Henry Ford, not out of the kindness of his own heart, right? I mean, I'm sure there was definitely some kindness behind his motivating principle, but a large part was, I have people working my factory floor who can't afford the product that they're manufacturing. If they can afford the product they're manufacturing, I manufacture more cars. It's not rocket science. If people can afford to buy the product, I sell more product, my stock price goes up. So basically, he created the minimum wage and lots of other employers followed suit. They also had this eureka of like, oh my gosh, if people can actually afford to buy stuff, my market share increases, my production goes up. And there's countless examples of this in history. I mean, Whole Foods being one of the most recent ones where for a grocery store chain, very unconventional, but every employee at Whole Foods had stock in the company. There was no legal requirement to give people stock in the company. Everyone from member of head office down to someone who was unloading the trucks and loading the shelves, they all had stock. Why? Because if someone has stock, they have ownership. If someone has ownership, they care. If someone cares, the customer experience is better. Customer experience is better. They come to your shop rather than the competitor's shop. It's not rocket science, yet we all struggle in this society to remember that at the end of the day, transactions are relationships and relationships are deeply human. Even with this whole AI BS that's going on, I still think, and I actually think we're even going to turn to even more humanity craving. But at the end of the day, it's all about human to human relationship. And I think if you're able to understand that and somewhat take advantage of that, you have a significant power as a management team, as a company in the market, because people gravitate towards that you're creating your own gravitational field in that sense.
I totally agree. Trust is the one component that cannot be faked or created by a machine or whatnot. And I was having this conversation recently, And it feels like 2026, 2027 focus will be on in-person and real life activations because it's really the only way you can determine if something is real or not. Even, on Instagram, there are beginning to be like AI influencers, and the person you're following might not actually be a human. They might not exist. And so, even down the road, like podcasts could be AI produced.
And they will be. I mean, that's why Spotify bought. So one of the portfolio companies in our investors' portfolio was bought by Spotify for exactly this. So they can create synthetic podcasts. My question is, who the hell wants to listen to a synthetic podcast? Like, information is in abundance. One of the beauties of a podcast is the stories behind the people in the podcast that are so fascinating. It's what led this person to this hour clip, right? This hour clip is a condensation of your and my, whatever, 31 plus years of experience. It's not this conversation. This conversation's immaterial in the grand scheme of things.
And it's exactly why I am going to start asking a couple of different questions in the next 5 to 10 minutes here, because I love to paint the background of who the person is and what gives context to the talking shop, right? Anyone can talk shop, but it's the humanizing of why somebody cares about something, right? I'm going to refer to Alex Mather, who we both know, the CEO of Eternal. I had him on this podcast over the summer, and in the buildup of who is Alex the human, he shared that when he was 12, his mom was diagnosed with an illness or a sickness, and running was taken away from her. And so as a result, he became he just didn't want to lose running. He didn't want to lose movement. And so his time at Strava was in the facilitation of creating community and helping people find and love sport. And then Eternal is the how do we delay the drop off for as long as possible, because he's seen what happens when that drop off exists. And so it totally changed the dynamic of the conversation, right? He had a $500 million exit to the New York Times. In theory, somebody who has $500 million exit to any company doesn't need to work anymore. They can choose to work. And so when somebody chooses to work grounded by a mission that is in the facilitation of helping people versus doing capitalism and identifying a market opportunity and pouncing on that, it's you run the business totally differently and you communicate totally differently. And so it's just the most perfect example of when you can understand somebody's why, the how becomes so much more meaningful.
I think, well, two things. I think one, the reason that that's how you conduct your conversations, I think that's why we bonded so quickly, because I'm sick and tired of people having superficial level conversations where it's can we just both admit that we're, one, making shit up as we go? None of us are experts. Can we also, two, admit the fact that we're human with our own traumas and our own negative experiences in life? And that we're just trying to carve out something of ours in this massive chaotic world, which is getting even more chaotic with, Mr. Orange in the White House. And then the third one is, can we just give each other kindness and the benefit of doubt that we're just all trying our best? And I think once these three things are thrown into a conversation, you suddenly shed all of these walls and kind of niceties and fake. And I think that's one of the things that, what you just said around when you can understand someone's why, you can really understand how this person is going to behave in the world, in the business place, and, be successful or not successful. And I'm always fascinated that in my day-to-day line of work, when I'm speaking to investors, that they don't ask these questions. They ask the cut and dry, what's your market size? What's your total addressable? What's your go-to-market? What's your traction? That's all well and good. The issue is in startups where you're literally fighting fire every single day. And they always say, we invest in the company and we invest in the team. They don't ask anywhere near enough questions, in my opinion, about the team. They don't ask me why, I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I could be a banker, I could be a lawyer, I could be a doctor. I mean, there's so many different choices available to us in the world. What I'm always fascinated by is why did you choose this career path of all the choices available? And I think that's when you really understand someone and you can understand how tenacious they are, what's driving them, what's their non-negotiables in life. And those are the interesting questions. That's where you really get to know someone.
Yeah, I've had that conversation on the investment front as it relates to the difference between angel investing and VC funds, right? The angel investing side is much more vibes focused and who is the person and what do they care about? I've joked that one of the first angel investments I made was into a company led by a guy I would follow into a burning room if he told me that that was the best path forward. And shout out to Phil of Brooksy. Like when you have somebody who is such an excellent operator, you almost don't even need to, look in their shorts and for the financials and whatever. And like I didn't. And it's going well. And he's grown the company substantially. And like they're much better positioned today than they were 2 years ago to have the impact that they're looking to have. And if I were writing a $2 million check, that's a different story than a $15,000 check. I understand the difference, the magnitude of, or the gravity is different. However, one is much earlier, one is perhaps a little more established. It's just a really interesting dynamic between that.
I don't know if we're mutually connected, but one of the most fascinating people I've met so far in my career is one of the founders of Strava, a guy called Mark Gainey. And he and I sat down many times. And one of the things that he was always saying, because, I've obviously asked if he wanted to have a bit of skin in the game in FLOWBIO. And he's like, look, I leave investing up to the professionals. It's the hardest job in the world. I would never want to do it. And when I double clicked on that, it's like, well, I kind of in my own head was like, actually, thinking about it, it is a bloody hard job, right? Because essentially, what is the role of an institutional investor, especially in the venture scene? It's unless you have deep relevant operational expertise in that certain vertical of the company that you've invested in. If you have that, it's a different story. But for 99% of investments, you don't. Therefore, your job as an investor is to spot an opportunity, come in early enough where it makes sense for the fund dynamics, invest, and then just sit down and get out of the way. Now, that being on the job description of someone who went to Stanford, spent 4 years at Goldman Sachs, then was like, I don't know, a chief of staff for a scale up, telling them to spend 3-4 hours on a deal, place their bet and walk away and come back in 9.5 years later and see how it's done. And multiply that by you're doing that. If you're a good seed investor and, let's say you have a $50 million fund, you need to allocate in the first 2-3 years of the fund, right? So, and if you're typically writing, I don't know, say 1 million checks, which is actually on the larger side for a seed fund, you need to be writing 1 check a month for 3 years. And then you still haven't really allocated your fund. That's the kind of volumes we're talking about. And they're writing maybe 1 or 2 a quarter or a half year, right? So the issue that they then face is they're running up to year 4 or 5 of their fund. They've got another 30-40% to allocate, and they can only invest in high revenue opportunities as a seed stage fund because that's the only opportunity they're going to get to exit their fund for their LPs and have an IRR that's semi-respectable and competitive with other asset classes. It's a tough job. I mean, I've met sovereign wealth funds. They're not nice people, right? They ask 2 things. What's your IRR? When do I get it? That's it. That's all I care about. And if the answer is not an answer I like to hear, get out of my face. Because the world of VC, the world of asset classes, it's commodity. Money's the biggest commodity in the world. And all they're doing is they're looking for a bucket, which is going to make it slightly more than the other bucket, left or right of it. That's a really tough job. I would take my chances in the open market any day as a founder over an investor because I at least have the ability to spot a trend and build towards that future and be more in control of that future coming to fruition. Obviously, as a founder, we all know that we're not in control of our destiny. I think, you'd be lying to yourself if luck and timing were 2 of the biggest factors. But still, you have a little bit more hands-on day-to-day, 12 hours a day type thing where you're massaging and maneuvering the business. So yeah, we should kind of tip our hat off to investors because it's a hard existence. And I think you have to make it nice by going to conferences and, splurging the cash and nice dinners because it's tough. It's a minimal, shallow existence when all you're doing is investing and having to take a step back. And I think what we're now starting to see is the better venture funds are realizing this and they're kind of either reducing their AUM, having leaner teams, more specific teams to a certain industry where they're really getting hands-on with the teams because that's where you, one, just have a better and more enjoyable 10 years as the fund kind of plays its life cycle. But 2, you also just feel a lot more like you're hands-on and you're doing something. I mean, the amount of VCs that I've been speaking to now that are investing off the books with their own checks because they're so frustrated that their fund isn't allocating. This is a real trend. I've had this now twice in the last month.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. It's interesting.
If I'm an LP, that would piss me off because you're spending my money time, my management fees in investing in your own portfolio.
Just a couple of points of clarification. IRR is essentially the annualized rate of return, AUM, assets under management. So if a fund has, $1 billion, under management of their investments. That's what that refers to. Let's talk about you. You have a background in triathlon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I did dabble in long course.
How did sport find you? To switch gears, cycling pun intended.
Okay, now we're going to get deep. Now we are going to get deep. All right, so how did sport find me? Basically, now we have to go way back and kind of go back into history. So my father is an incredible human being. A very, very inspirational dude, self-made, only one from his family to go to university. So the way that he, I think, defines success and made something of himself to really graft and to work hard and essentially try and do better than the generation before him and make more from what he was given. So work has been a lot to his life, which means he spent a lot of time on the road. I mean, he worked his way up to very, very senior leadership at Hewlett Packard, which is why as a Dutch guy, I have an American accent because we lived in the foothills of Palo Alto, a place called Portola Valley. Anyways, long story short, he was always traveling. So the only time that I could get real quality time with my dad was on the weekends when he was doing his long runs. So when I was around 14, 15, and this kind of like was the intersection of two things happening. One, wanting more quality time with my father. And two, I used to be a really large kid when I was younger and got massive amount of bullying for that. So I just decided one day, you know what, fuck it. Let's change my appearance because that's clearly what people are pointing me out for. So let's just remove that thing and, off the get. So I lost a ton of weight, started to feel really good within myself, and then started to realize, oh my gosh, there's like so much fun you can have with your body when it's not like unhealthy and just lethargic and heavy and weighed down. So I started to really enjoy my running with my dad. And then kind of with my ADHD and never happy brain.
Okay, this is another reason why we hit it off, because I also have that same brain.
Yes. And this is a brain that I've been trying to mold to not be my worst enemy. Because I think, if this brain can be, and my parents always say this, like my strengths are also my greatest weaknesses. What makes me me in a good way also makes me bad, or makes me in a bad way. Like it can be my downfall, so to speak. So in this thing of not being able to find satisfaction, I spent well over 10 years in that state of just like constantly chasing, living for when things are, when I'm, more successful, when the company's in a better place. And I've really had to deal with like, okay, no, today, now, in the present, because you're never going to get there. With the brain that I have, I'm never going to make it. And that's the beauty of my brain. Like the point isn't to make it, it's to constantly like grow and challenge yourself. I always joke that when I'm building FlowBio, yes, I'm building a company which will hopefully and should do have a pretty healthy exit for myself, the team, and the investors. I'm getting a PhD in life. And it's so fun. It is so amazing, the skill sets that you learn in building a company. And that's one thing that like I've learned to kind of tell my brain, because, in breakup situations, the brain is just not a great thing. Like it sometimes works against us. I have a friend who was going through a breakup a while back, really nasty breakup. And he was like, my brain is just telling me I should get back. I'm like, well, that's what your brain is going to do, because your brain is hardwired for comfort. Sometimes your brain is not what you listen to, even though it's where all the choices and get made. Sometimes you have to ignore your brain because your brain can actually be your enemy. So I think I've learned to like listen to the brain. I've had a lot of coaching, a lot of therapy. I've really found it fascinating to understand how the brain works from like a neurochemical standpoint and from a primal standpoint, because realistically, our brain has not evolved that much beyond our ape days. So I think it hasn't. And I mean, we see a lot of this behavior in many situations, including the White House. And I think one of the things that I'm really obsessive about is how I can always like fine tune and optimize. And I think that's why I found triathlon, because for me, running was one thing to optimize. But then this crazy thing called triathlon is like, you're never going to perfect triathlon. It's 3 disciplines. Each individual discipline takes a lifetime to master. And you're suddenly having to like master all 3, which is just never going to happen. So it's a good lesson in humility that the point is not to become a master. The point is to always like pursue and try and finesse and never reach. So yeah, again, I never do things half-assed. I either do them or I don't do them. So when it came to triathlon, I was like, okay, I really want to do this sport. I got deeper and deeper into it. In 2018, came first for the national championships in the Netherlands for my age group. So I was like, okay, I'm not bad at this sport. So I got a coach. That coach basically helped me try to go pro. And it was actually in that journey that I found kind of the origin for the company that I'm now building. But yeah, that basically was my journey into triathlon. It was very much to connect with my father and to, kind of take the bullseye off the back, which was causing me a lot of grief through bullying.
Wow, there are so many places I could go from there
Yes.
because so much of that resonates, right? I too have ADHD. I too feel like I'm always on that hedonic treadmill as it's been described. I read a book by Andrew Wilkinson called Never Enough. And Andrew came from lower middle class and became a billionaire on paper over the years. And as time went on, he kept meeting more and more wealthy people. And there was a particular week where he was in, I think, the Bay Area, and he met somebody with $100 million net worth and $250 million and $500 million and $1 billion. And he found that what was consistent with all these people is that they were always striving for, like, they felt that once they hit 2x what they currently had, that would be enough. And then he would talk to somebody who had 2x what that person had, and they were looking for 2x what they had. And the person who had 2x what they had was looking for 2x. And so it's just this, like, part of it is like, I think that to be successful, conventionally successful, quote unquote, you have to have that kind of screw loose that you're always pursuing. Like, I have a friend who, he has a, very high net worth, and he could retire, but he chooses not to because I think he would be bored and he wouldn't be stimulated. And he's in a place where, like, it makes sense for him to keep working in this period of life and kind of capture that value. And it's probably also what allowed him to get to a place where, like, his skill set put him in position to be the right place, right time with the right opportunity. And I just think that, like, it's not about, like, blocking or limiting that piece of the brain. It's about harnessing the, like, how do you enjoy and appreciate what you have while still feeling like
pursuing.
While still pursuing. If this episode is sparking something for you, we'd love to hear it. Share your takeaways on LinkedIn and tag Long Run Labs so we can follow along and join in on the discussion. Your reflections help the ideas go further and might be exactly what someone else needs to see in their feed today. Okay, so you're building this business, FLOWBIO. Talk to us about what the business is. What I think is fascinating is you have some, like, absolute, like, gem angel investors and investors, period, with the company, with backgrounds at Oura and the Athletic Brewing and Strava and all these, like, fantastic cornerstone institutions in the outdoor and health tech space. How did you get to a place where this is your network and that's what you're building?
Yeah, so just to fact check, I wish one of the Strava guys, I mean, Mark, if you're listening, this is another opportunity. But
Mark subscribes to the Substack, so hopefully he's also listening.
Mark was one of our first customers. Mark's always listening. Mark's a great dude, but I also respect his discipline. I mean, I was speaking to another angel earlier today in Switzerland. He used to be the CEO of Giro, the helmet company. And he was like, my wife and I sat down recently and we agreed no more angel investing because it just mostly just doesn't make money, which by and large, I would agree with.
Yeah, and it's not really the point. It's to, like, have a horse in the race, and yeah,
and just to, like, feel like you're in the game still, you're participating, you're giving back.
Yeah, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're curious about angel investing and you're wanting to use it as a way to make money, it's not put it in the stock market. There's better asset classes. If you just want an example, people who professionally invest, and we're talking venture capital funds, at best, most funds have an IRR of, like, maybe 10 to 15%, which my own stock portfolio beats that. Like, my stock picking portfolio beats most venture portfolios. Probably by a large margin.
Yes, but I think the point of venture and the point of angel is not per se the returns, though obviously if you're an LP it is. The point, in my opinion, is to bring technology that is going to touch every single person's life. That is why venture was born. It was born post-World War, part of the space race, to create all the technologies that got us to the moon, which created the computer industry, which obviously now, we all know the story and how it ended. So I think it's wildly successful if you go in with the right expectations. But yeah, in terms of FlowBio, I mean, it's a good question. I have asked myself this from time to time. My answer is, it's always kind of comes back down to like I said earlier, if I want something, I get it. If I don't want something, it doesn't happen. I really want FlowBio to be a thing. I think it is wild. The more that we build this company, it's wild to think that in a world 3 to 5 years down the line, people aren't going to be data-driven in their hydration. And, over my dead body, is that future going to exist without us being the one to create it? So as a function of that, you just have to go and figure out how to make it work. And as a function of that, you meet all these very interesting people because if you founded a company in the wearable space, you obviously are passionate about wearables. I mean, take it from me, like building a hardware company sucks. It's difficult. You're constantly pushing a rock up the hill, but I wouldn't choose it for anything else because it's so incredibly rewarding. But I think as a function of that, you meet people who did the same, right? So Athletic Brewing guys, massive, massive hardware company, right? Like they have 2 breweries, I think, in the US. They ship product globally, incredible hardware intensive business. And they started off in the athletic community. And I cannot remember how Bill and John and I connected, but we did. And then they were responsible for another $500,000 syndicate that came off the back of their check because they basically said, hey, we have a bunch of our angel investors who we think this would be really good for. And they brought them in. Pedri from Oura, again, I can't remember how I met him, but he invested off the back of like an hour and a half conversation. And then he brought his investor from, I think, seed at Oura, and they led our 3rd and 4th round. It's one of those things where it's like at the end of every meeting, I typically ask someone like, who else do you think I should speak to? Who else do you think I should meet with? Because interesting people know other interesting people, and you're benefiting from the networks that they've built over the years. And I think that's been one of my greatest hacks of trying to get in. And also just like, I reject the idea that most people in our industry wouldn't be excited by what FlowBio is building, because if they're not excited by it, they probably shouldn't be in the industry. Because I think hydration is like, if we kind of boil the human down to like basic, in order for us to exist, we need to do 4 things. We need to breathe, we need to sleep, we need to eat, and we need to stay hydrated. That's it. Like all the other stuff is kind of niceties on top. That's the foundation on which everything else is built. So if we look at, sleep, we've quantified it, this and this is doing a pretty good job at helping me understand my sleep cycles, understand, this whole thing with sleep debt is a complete fad, but whatever, like it lets you know how consistent you are with your sleep. I think, again, on the point of sleep debt, we as an industry should do better in bringing real science to the customer, not anxiety-inducing science. But by and large, sleep is pretty well quantified. My calories, food, if I wanted to count, which I do as an athlete, like I can use the Hexus app, I can count all my macros, I can make sure that my caloric expenditure matches my caloric intake. Like that's pretty much done. Breathing, obviously, that's one of the first things you learn as a human being. So like breathing, you're pretty much covered. And then the only thing that's left is hydration. And I think specifically in hydration, the key thing that people forget about hydration or don't seem to understand is that it's not just about intake of fluids. Most time when I speak to people, I ask them, I mean, obviously you'll know the answer, so this is a bad example of doing it in, but mostly when I ask people, and we can do this test with your listeners right now, when I say hydration to you, Mr. and Mrs. Listener, the first thing that pops in your mind, be honest with yourself, but the first thing that pops in your mind, remember that. Okay, cool. Hydration. It is not simply drinking water or a lack of water. That is actually one of the 4 states of dehydration. The most common cause for dehydration actually in athletic sense is overhydrating. So you're actually hypernatremic. You're drinking way too much plain water and you're diluting your electrolytes. Hydration is the balance of water to sodium. And if we go back to like really basic, I don't know, I wasn't going to say like preschool because it's definitely not preschool, but wherever you're, maybe 12 or 13 years old, whatever that like class is called, chemistry, osmosis. All of our chemistry teachers did this. They would have water, they would have salt. The water would be drawn to the salt. So that's exactly what happens in our cells. If we are ingesting plain fluid and there's not enough sufficient, the water isn't drawn into the cells. The water just kind of sits there. And furthermore, if you're constantly adding to that water, the water eventually needs to pass through the system. And what will happen is you're just flushing out all your electrolytes, and all these important electrochemical reactions that are supposed to take place can't take place. And that is the issue. At first principle, most of us don't know what dehydration is. We're solving the problem with another problem, which is we're just drinking plain water. I mean, everyone's walking around with these massive jugs of water where they're like, oh yeah, I need 2 of these a day. And it's like, well, if you just drink 2 of those a day and that's all it is plain water, you're actually like really not going to be in a good place in a couple months.
Now you're referring to athletes, right? Not the everyday person that's not exercising 5 to 20 hours a week, right?
I'm kind of referring to everyone. I think a lot, especially people who lead a pretty healthy lifestyle and diet where, like a whole foods diet, not much processed food, not much kind of meal, like, refrigerated meals or whatever. We're actually at a heightened risk of dehydration because we've kind of stripped out sodium from our diet because doctors say salt is bad, therefore don't take salt. It's similar with like, fat is bad, carbs are bad. We just strip out really basic things from our diet that are critical and that are necessary. So no, I'm kind of talking about all of us. I mean, we always joke that anyone with a sweat gland and a heartbeat is a FlowBio customer. So, minus the prince who did some dodgy shit with Jeffrey Epstein, who claims that he doesn't sweat, minus him, basically everyone is our customer. So a really good example and case study that I was made aware of by an investor we were speaking to about 2 months ago. They had recently relocated back from Japan, and they were telling me, like, Stefan, I don't think you realize how large the market is for what you're building. I don't think you realize how big the problem is. And I'm like, well, I think we do, because otherwise we wouldn't be sacrificing everything we hold dear to pursue this company. But I always want to learn more. So humor me. And she basically proceeded to tell me about how in Japan, in the emergency department, so any patient walking through A&E, or whatever the equivalent in the US it's called, they would be hooked up to an IV drip. So they wouldn't be triaged, they would be brought to an IV drip. And the reason for this is they found out that 50% of everyone who walks into A&E after being on the IV protocol walks home symptom-free. Which, I mean, talk about impactful triage. Like, you're wasting no doctor time. And essentially half the patients, all they were just dehydrated. They just needed a bit of sodium, they needed a bit of electrolytes, a bit of fluids. The beauty of an IV drip is the osmolality of an IV drip is designed to be engineered for optimal absorption rate within the body. So it is quite an expensive solution still, but it is significantly more cost effective than a doctor treating you for phantom symptom, which you don't have. So that kind of spells out that the size of the problem is, like, we are all chronically dehydrated, athletes especially. And we've seen this in our own data. Around 85% of athletes who used one of the features when we launched it, which was kind of a good indicator for prior habits before they came onto the FlowBio platform, 85% of them were under consuming sodium by a factor of 2 to 3x what they should be.
As a sweaty person myself, sweaty and salty, I've had my sweat rate tested, sodium content tested. And yeah, the magnitude of impact is high for me. I think I'm 1366 on the scale there. If the average is like 700 or 800, I'm up there. So the risk is there.
And this is also, just quickly on that point, we as a company and as an industry now, because we're not the only product in this space, but as an industry, we're actually starting to educate the world, to begin with the physiological community, nutritionists and practitioners, that your sodium concentration isn't a static number. It's not okay, you test it once and that's it. It fluctuates constantly. I mean, I'm not going to do it because I think the webcam and it just wouldn't work, live demo. But my sodium concentration can fluctuate anywhere from 400 milligram per liter all the way up to 1.8 gram per liter.
Based on things like if you're using sauna regularly.
Yeah, so sauna is a good point. It's not the sauna that's changing your salt per se. It's the fact that if you're regularly doing sauna, what you're actually doing is your body is heat acclimating. And as a function of heat acclimatization, your body gets more efficient at dispersing the heat, the energy that your body's producing. So your sweat rate goes up. So the dissipation rate of heat, it gets more efficient. But your sweat sodium concentration actually goes down, because what your body's learning is, okay, we're being subjected to situations in which we're having to expel a lot of fluid to dissipate our body temperature. But salt is critical to maintaining a hydrated state. So I'm going to reabsorb the sodium before it leaves my bloodstream or my sweat gland, because I don't want to be in a deficit state of sodium. So your sweat sodium concentration actually goes down. And this is one of the many use cases that people use the FlowBio sensor for. It's to have a finer tune into whether their body's responding to the heat training or the heat prep that they're doing. So Brian Johnson, who is a very infamous kind of health hacker, he's one of our most latest users to have the FlowBio sensor. He's obviously an infamous heat sauna or sauna dude. But yeah, I think the cool thing about the FlowBio sensor is we're actually exposing to the industry this old notion, which by and large was created by a company called Precision Hydration, who have the sweat test, and they have hundreds of locations globally in the world which give you a sweat test, and they say you only need to test once. We've proven that that is outdated, and we're actually starting to see a lot of Precision Hydration sweat test centers coming to us at FlowBio and starting to sell the FlowBio sensor, because it helps them provide their customers with significantly more resolution behind what their sweat is doing day in, day out.
So you decide this is a good idea. I'm going to start a company. What happens next?
So this was back in 2020. So my co-founder and I, we actually started the company a week before national lockdown here in the UK, and basically synonymous with like international lockdown globally. So we had to, from day zero, it was already a struggle, because we suddenly weren't able to have an office, which we needed as a hardware company to develop prototypes. So initially what we did was we developed a lot of kind of demand indicators for our products. We're like, okay, we can't build a prototype because that would be illegal, because we can't go to in a lab. So what we're going to try and do is basically prove to our initial investor that there is demand for this. And we're going to find proxies outside of like sales that are going to help us do that. So we spoke with a bunch of athletes, high profile to amateur. One of the most amazing like first conversations I had was with Tim Don, who used to hold the world record for fastest Ironman. He had notorious issues with dehydration and basically was immediately kind of impressed by what we were building. Having Tim on your advisory board went miles with kind of speaking to investors because they're like, okay, this anyone who would know something, it's an Ironman world record holder. So I think we found proxies that basically gave us some justification as to why we should exist. And then once we were allowed into the lab, we knew it was going to be years before we had a product. So again, we needed to find proxy indicators. With hardware companies, you're basically always in a state of fundraising. So what you're always trying to do is you're trying to show the market, in this case, the investment community, that what you're building has merit before you can build it. Because a lot of the times it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to actually build the damn thing. So we always called these things proxies. So the first proxy for the FLOWBIO sensor was actually what we called the sweat test kit, which was a kit, vials, tegaderm patches, and extractor kind of syringes, where we would ask athletes to wear these patches in a variety of situations, send us the sweat samples to the lab. We would analyze it for them and provide them with a Google Sheet report of how their sweat behaved. And we would ask them to weigh themselves in and out. And basically what would happen from this is we had a very lo-fi indicator that two things. One, someone is willing to know this data enough that they're going through this massively arduous process, it was not a fun process. So we're like, okay, there's intent, which is great. And two, based on the data, there's no one sweat sodium number that's the same. So we've debunked what the industry has claimed, that the sweat sodium is static, because our concern was if sweat sodium is indeed static, what's the point for a continuous wearable, right? You don't need a continuous wearable.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Like the business case of proving that it is dynamic versus static, like it makes more sense for the company to like want it to be what you found, right? Repeat usage versus like a DNA test.
If it wasn't what we found, I don't think you and I would be talking today, for like being completely honest, because why'd you need a $400 sensor to tell you the same number day in, day out? Now, there are arguments to say that sweat rate always is going to change because sweat rate is directly related to caloric expenditure. But yeah, I mean, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So, every company has their leap of faith moments. This was definitely one of our leap of faith moments that this actually, from a scientific like grounding standpoint, was relevant.
So I know we only have like 3 minutes here. What happened next? You decided we're moving, we're rolling, the lab is able to be open. How do you go from concept and fundraising to product in hand?
Yeah, I mean, lots of trial and error, 3 near-death experiences. I put all my life savings into the business at a point to keep us afloat. My co-founder burnt out from fundraising kind of malarkey. So like it's definitely not been a straight line by any stretch of the imagination. I think, again, it comes down to that thing that I was talking about earlier, which is like this just determination that this future is going to exist, and like over my dead body does it exist without us having built it. So we went through multiple iterations of the hardware. So we initially had a single-use architecture where you actually had to throw away the sensor. That was the only feasible way at which we thought we could do what we're doing. We actually managed to engineer around this through some pretty ingenious engineering from our head of R&D, now CTO, Dr. Roland Mingels. We built the world's first fully reusable sweat sensor. It is also now the most accurate sweat sensor. We can kind of hand to God say that because it's the only independently validated sweat sensor. So it was validated by the University of Rome, funded by World Athletics, with the paper coming out in January. So that's something that we spent a lot of time trying to pursue because in our opinion, as scientists and engineers, like if there's no grounding in science and fact, what's the point? So we really wanted to make sure that that was always rooted in the DNA of the product as well as just it's the culture of our company. But yeah, we went through alphas and betas. So we had 1 alpha, 1 beta. And basically every time we learned something new, the first alpha taught us that reusable has to be the way because single-use sensors are just way too finicky. The cost to the customer is too high. The operating cost is too high. The retention is poor. Then when we expanded out to the reusable platform, we learned very quickly that we needed to develop and engineer a lot more of these devices because we were sold out within weeks of launch. So we've basically been sold out for 5 straight quarters. So we've been having 200% growth quarter on quarter. Our demand is massively outstripping our supply, which is again why we're now fundraising. It's kind of a happy fundraise because like we know the thing works, it's validated, it's established. We're used by World Tour athletes, Ironman world champion, like Lucy Charles Barkley uses the device. We got like Hayden Wild, Olympic silver medalist, was kind of referred to us by Sam Dickinson. They're both in the T100. So in the pro paddock of sports, people are talking about it. People are trying to find it and they're trying to access it. I'd be lying if I said it was a straight line. And the amount of times that I was like, I'm not joking. The amount of times I was on LinkedIn Jobs looking for a job that I could do. And I was like, fuck this. Like, all these jobs are depressing. I have to make this work. Like, I can't go back into the market and go from building this like industry changing company, like we're creating an industry, to just, pushing paper. There were a lot of motivating moments of just like when you're at your utmost desperation point to still try and find that extra bit of energy. I mean, building a company is really like being an endurance athlete. You're really in it for the long run. And I think one of the things that I learned as an individual myself is just how much I need to treat being a CEO as being a pro athlete. So I've been able to lean on my kind of athletic career for those learnings. Yeah, it's been hard, but it's been incredibly rewarding at the same time.
One of my favorite podcasts, Second Nature, talks about, one of their episodes was titled "Business is Hard." So we'll have to do a follow-up with you in a year and get a check back in on the progress made, the ups, the downs, and everything in between.
Yeah, it'll be a good year. I mean, we're at the Tour de France this year with a company we can't yet name, but I think we should definitely check back in the year because I think it'll be rags to riches, hopefully.
Love it. Awesome. Well, this has been a blast. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
So our website is probably the easiest place to go to, flowbio.com, FLOWBIO. Our Instagram handle. I don't personally do social, but yeah, I'm always available for chat through LinkedIn or WhatsApp. I'm super easy to access. I don't try and add barriers in front of me. So yeah, probably the easiest way to get to us is via my LinkedIn or our website via the contact form.
Amazing. Appreciate the chat, and we'll see you out there.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate you, and good luck with the pup.
To close things off, here's a puppy who is...
Oh, he knows he's in trouble now. Look at that face.
He knows he's in trouble.
He's like, oh, shit.
Yeah. And with that, thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Long Run Labs. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building something of their own. We'll be back next Tuesday with more stories at the intersection of endurance and entrepreneurship from the people shaping the outdoor industry in ways big and small. Until then, keep showing up, keep asking questions, and we'll see you out there. This show is produced by Dylan Delaney of Delaney Video LLC, with musical composition by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound, and managed overall by Emily Holland of Wild Poppy Creative.